Hey there everybody and welcome back. For those of you that are interested in learning how to create 3D objects, especially if you're wanting to learn how to create them for 3D printing, stay tuned. I'm going to be covering the basics in today's video. Now before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out the channel for new content. Alright, so jumping straight in, we have Autodesk Tinkercad pulled up here. You can go to their website and sign up for a free account, and when you log in, you will see a dashboard like this. Now, your different projects and designs will be displayed here, and you can see when you mouse over, you don't have to click, they should just rotate like this. Now, I have noticed when I've zoomed in on this page and tried to open up a new basically a new design, I have seen some issues with how it loads, so I would recommend testing out like zooming. I just keep mine at 100% by default, but basically we're just going to jump straight in. So we're going to click create and we'll choose 3D design because we're focusing specifically on things we can 3D print today. Now, when we have selected that, you'll see your item name up here. You can click it to change the name. It'll auto name it here. And then you'll see when you click here, all of your other designs will appear here as well. So what we are going to do is we're going to start on the left-hand side and work our way over. So your view when you start out is going to look similar to this. Now if you ever want to return to that view, you can click home and it'll set you right there. Now you can right click and drag around and you'll see your orientation up here in this cube, and you'll also see the different areas of this work plane. Now this is surprisingly important, especially when you're resizing and trying to line objects up. The last thing you want to do is draw a very complex object and then find out that something isn't centered correctly because you didn't look at it from all sides. So if you want to ever return home, click here, but you can also click on any of these planes and it will center that for you. So you left click here and click on front and you'll see you'll go to the front, and clicking here takes you home. Now this is a fit all in view. So you'll see if we were to click this right now, nothing happens. In order to make this work, you would need objects. So we'll select this as an example and just click here to place it. And now when we click on this, you'll see it zooms in automatically. And then if we want to, we can click home and it'll take us back to the beginning of the actual video or this view. Now you can zoom in and out with these two options, and then you'll see we have a switch to flat view if you're interested. Now, a couple of things over here. So you'll see we have a snap grid. You'll see it's 1 millimeter, and you can choose the different options here to help make this a little bit more accurate, so to speak. So now that we've covered those basics, let's walk through some shapes. So you'll see you have several different options. For example, if we wanted to make this cylinder, we can click here, and you'll see we have dropped it on our work plane. You can see when we move it around, it's lined up with that plane, which is going to be important when we go over the other work plane tools in a moment. Now you can zoom in by scrolling, and you'll see we have our snap grid. So let's click here, and we'll choose 0.1 millimeter, and you'll see that now our accuracy of that snap grid is changing, as you can tell by these decimals down here. Now, you can also select here and type in and hit enter, and it'll move it as well. And that will work for basically any of these numbers that are showing up here. When you hit enter, it'll move it and change that size. You can also see in this option here, we have a bevel, and you'll see when we zoom in, that's changing this edging here. And when you scroll down, it changes it down here as well. So we can zoom out, and as we change this, you'll see that bevel is changing. And we also have this segments option. So you have a couple of different options to work from. And again, you just use your mouse. And if you ever need to, you can just click home to get resized. Now you can use your left click to select or multi-select. So you'll see if we select this, it's the same thing doing this as it is just by clicking on the object. So you'll see again, you can change all of those settings if you're interested. And then you can change the sides as well. So you'll see as we zoom in what this is doing, you can see these little individual corners here. So as we reduce this number, it ends up looking less like a cylinder and more like, depending on the number of sides, that specific shape. So it's not technically a cylinder, although that is the name, but it does have these edges, and they do show up when you print. So we've covered the basics for that, and it's going to be the same with your other objects as well. But now we're going to talk about placing objects on top of objects and working with planes. So for example, if we select an object and drop it right here, that's really all that there is to it. We now have this sphere. But if we choose the sphere and put it next to it, and we go and change the plane, you'll see that the lowest point on the sphere is touching either the work plane or the object that we dropped it on. So now we're going to get into the actual work planes. So to help illustrate this, we're going to drop a square right here, and then what we'll do is we're going to use the right mouse button and we'll click on the square, and you'll see we have an option right here to select the work plane. Now when you do this, you'll see that you have the ability to select the work plane based on what you're currently touching, so to speak. So if we have this on top of this square, you'll see the work plane would become the top of the square. And you'll notice that that work plane adjusts for each of these individual points on top of this cylinder, or at least on the side, and it's the same thing with the sphere. So what's going to happen if we wanted to choose, let's just say we want to work on a work plane that's at an angle. We can select this, and it'll look a little intimidating at first, but you'll see what happens is the work plane, which was originally this horizontal work plane, is now this orange plane that's cutting into this square. So you can use this to manipulate various options or objects, and the idea would be once you have this set up, you can then use this to create more complex objects or figures. So for example, if I wanted to add in something like another square, you'll see now we are working on this plane. So if I wanted to cut into this square in some way, shape, or form, you'll see we have the ability to do so. So if we're working on this plane and we click this square, you'll see it says hold C to place shape on work plane. And when we do that, now you'll see we are only on this orange plane as opposed to right now where we are working off of various other shapes. So when we hold C here, we can click to place it. And then the idea is you'll be able to place it on that plane and work with that object. So an example is if we were to go around and let's just say we place the object here, and then we can go back to our original work plane. So you have a couple of different options and ways to do that. So first up, if we hit our home button, you'll see we have our work plane that is diagonal-ish to our main plane, so to speak. And to change the plane, you can just click here and choose the new work plane. So that's really all that there is to it. Now, the next thing you may be wondering is how people draw some of these more complex shapes when these are the majority of the shapes that we have access to. So there's a couple different ways, and it's usually easier to combine them. So let's walk through this really quickly. So if you decided, all right, I want to work on a different work plane and combine two shapes to make something unique. Well, when you put a shape down, it's going to stay stuck to whatever plane you're working on. So you'll see as I move this, it's not moving up or down, it's just moving forward, backward, left, and right on that plane. So what we could do here is we have our square, and we can choose a work plane, and we'll select something right here. Now, if I chose something like this square, you would have the ability to place it on this plane, and now you'll see we have this slightly sideways square, and now maybe I want to cut into these two objects. To do this, you can click on Whole, and you'll see that this square changes colors. So now when we scroll through, you can see it's overlapping these two objects. So what we can do here is, if you want to embed that into one or both, you select the ones you want it to cut into, and then you can click Group. Now, once you do this, you'll see those are now basically split. So now we have slightly more unique shapes. And then we can choose our home plane again and click our home button. And now you can see that we have this circle that's partially cut in half, and it moves with this larger option. And then if you ever wanted to, you can click ungroup. Now the important thing to note is you'll see right now it's grouping all three. So if you only want these two grouped, you can select them and click group. And now when you move this, it's cut, but this object is still basically full size. So if you ever wanted to do this with text, for example, you could put your text on top of an object. You can resize it. And then we're going to walk through cutting holes in objects and try to wrap things up a bit here. So when you're doing something like this, as I'm sure you guessed, you can either keep the text like this so that the text will be basically coming up vertically, or you can choose to make it a hole. But if you notice, the hole is lined up with the top of the sphere, so it's not actually cut into it. So in order to change the vertical height, you would need to extend it, and you typically need to be beneath the plane you're working on. So in order to do that, you'll select the object and then right click and move below, and you'll then see an object or a little white square right here, and you'll see you can drag it down. Now we're feeding into the cylinder. So what we can do is select both, click group, and then you'll see that our text is now cut into this cylinder. Now you have two options. So first option is if you want to group items that are not touching, you select both and click group, and then they'll move as one unit. Or if you're interested, you can blend two objects together. So we can ungroup, and you'll see now everything gets a little messy. So what we'll decide to do is maybe we want to undo. So we can go through and decide what we want to split and how. So maybe I want to reshape this into something kind of unique. So I'll do that. I'll select both, I'll group them together, and then I will select both of these and I will group them together. And sometimes it can take a moment for this to update. And now if I wanted to put an object in another object, and let's just say we wanted to extend it to make something very weird, we can click here and put one object in the other. And then lastly, we would select them and click group. And then you'll see now, because the objects are inside of each other, we now have one single object, and it's those two objects combined. And you'll see it comes out just a bit on the bottom. So this is basically what this new shape looks like. Now, if you wanted to, you can again choose the different work planes to line up with this object, but that'll show you how to basically combine simple objects to make something more complex. You do also have this ruler tool. So you'll see when you select it and then select different objects, you'll see you get this kind of snap view, and it gives you a bunch of different estimates or different lengths and things of that nature. So you'll see we have, depending on your orientation, you'll be able to see your length, width, height, distance between various points on various objects. For example, if you wanted to, you can select this object and then the ruler applies here. You can also select this object and you'll see various details on this object, and they kind of float in space. So you can see that as we're zooming around, this one would be about 20 millimeters off the floor, etc. So that's really all that there is to the ruler. And then if you're interested, you have a notes tool, and we have the ability to import and export. So I'm going to do an import very quickly just to show you the basics. So if I go to the desktop, we are going to be working with SVG files. So in this case, I would want to import an SVG file that I know would work with this program. So in this case, I'll be using the logo for codelessfix.com, which is my website for developing mobile apps without code. You can feel free to check that out. But I'll select that, and you'll see I have my logo here, and then we'll click import. Now, this logo doesn't import very well. I think sometimes it can just be how things are picked up based on color, size, orientation. So if you ever need to, sometimes you can use a tool online like online-convert.com. Make sure you're using a reputable one so that you don't potentially download anything that is malicious. But the idea here is you'll see that we now have the SVG file, which is the logo, which didn't import correctly, but if you bring it through an online conversion tool, you can typically get it to come out a little bit better, and you can work with this if you wanted to put logos on various objects or elements. But it's just important to note that this import option is available, and you can see the different support types here. So that's really all that there is to that. You'll have some additional options up here you can look into, but this covers the basics. Now, as far as printing these objects, I want to walk through that very, very quickly. But before I do, I want to show this, which is basically just an object from our Tinkercad homepage. So if we open up Tinkercad, you'll see we have these objects here. And if I right click and click open in a new tab, you'll see that we get this view here. So we have the ability to view in 3D, share to classroom, download, work with it, or tinker. So you have a couple of different options that you can work with, and you can choose private and you can choose different settings here. So it's just an interesting option if you want to try to share designs. You can look into that further. So what we're going to do now is we're going to work through potentially printing. So we're going to click export, and we'll choose STL, which is probably going to be the best file type for us, and you'll see it is downloaded. So we'll close this, and then we will open up Cura or whatever slicer you want to use, and then we can just click Open Files, and in our download folder, it's right here, and you'll see it now shows up in Cura. Now, you'll need to manage sizing and everything else on your end, but you'll see if we select an object, we can choose Scale, and let's just say we wanted to increase it by 200. You'll see that we now have all of the objects scaled up, and if we click Slice, you will then get an idea of how many hours to estimate. And if you have things set up, I'll put a link in the description on setting this up, but you'll see your general estimate for the usage of filament and cost. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment box below. Check out the links in the description for other 3D printing tutorials, and I'll see you all in the next video.